Hey there, Beech class. This week we're going to continue our work on recount writing. So last week, hopefully, you wrote some recounts which include some of the following skills: headings and subheadings, adverbial phrases which express time, conjunctions to add clauses, and adjectives to create expanded noun phrases. And I'd really like you to continue to use those skills this week. If you're not sure about them, or if you're still struggling to know what these mean, why not have a look back at last week's learning videos to remind you. This week I want us to use all these skills, but I want to use some new ones as well. This week the new skills that we're going to look at are exclamation sentences and sentences that communicate directly to the audience. So as we read through Mr. McKinnon's model example, these are the ones I'd like us to really be focusing on. So let's look at Mr. McKinnon's writing. Mr. McKinnon is writing about a trip he went on to Scotland. Now, as like last week, I promise I haven't been breaking any of our social distancing rules. I haven't really been going to Scotland. This is a trip I went on a few years ago, and you can see that from little baby Alfred there, looking very small and being carried around in the sling. Okay. A trip to Scotland. Straight away you can see I've used a heading to organise my ideas. The day after we finished building the shed. Again, that's an adverbial which expresses time. My wife, baby Alfred and I went on a trip to Scotland. First of all, we got on the train to London and got on the underground. There we go, and is a conjunction to add a clause. To Euston Station. It was really fun because Alfred had never been on a train before. The station was big, busy, and exciting. Adjective, 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 which helps create an expanded noun phrase. So you can see in that first paragraph, I've already used all of those skills which we were focusing on last week. I haven't really touched on these skills here, these new skills, until right at the end. And we'll talk about that later. Okay, let's keep on reading. At 9 p.m, we got the sleeper train. The carriage was tiny and cramped, but we all managed to fit in. Alfred was very tired because it was past his bedtime, so we all went to sleep straight away. The next day we woke up at sunrise and realised that we were in the snowy highlands of Scotland. When we were all dressed and ready, we went to the dining car and ate delicious bacon sandwiches for breakfast. The views were amazing. As soon as we arrived in Scotland, we travelled to my auntie's house. Fred loved meeting her because she read lots of stories to him. During our trip to Scotland, we did some really interesting activities. We visited Loch Ness, but we didn't see the monster. We went to the beautiful sandy beach and played with a football. One day, we even got to make a snowman because it snowed so much. Finally, we flew back. It was Alfred's first time on an aeroplane, so we were a bit nervous, but he really enjoyed it. What a fantastic trip it was! Have you ever been on a really interesting trip? Could you write a recount of your experiences? It's these final two sentences which we're going to focus on now. We'll start with this one. What a fantastic trip it was. That's an example of an exclamation sentence. Let's learn a little bit more about exclamation sentences now. Okay. This is not the first time we've come across exclamation sentences. We've used them quite a few times this year. We use them when we're writing our diary entries from the point of view of Samuel Pepys, for example. Now, there's a few things we need to know about exclamation sentences. The first is, what's their use? Why do we use them? Well, exclamation sentences can be used to emphasize a point. So if you've written about how fun something was, an exclamation sentence can be used to emphasize that point, to make that point really clear. If you said how boring something was, the exclamation sentence can be used to emphasize that point, to make that point really clear. Because my writing was all about what a great trip we had, my exclamation sentence can be used to emphasize, to make that point really clear, just how fantastic my trip was. Now, there's a few things that we must include to create a proper exclamation sentence. Now, the first thing is this word here, what. Now, exclamation sentences are a little bit unusual because they must start with one of two words. They must start with either a what or a how. Those are the only two words that you can use to start an exclamation sentence. So if you're trying to create an exclamation sentence at home, this must be the starting point, either what or how. Another thing we need to know about an exclamation sentence is that it must have a verb in. If it doesn't have a verb in, it's not a proper exclamation sentence. So the verb I've used in is was, the verb to be in the past tense. Now, and the strange thing about exclamation sentences, the verb often appears as the last word in the sentence. Okay? So when you're creating an exclamation sentence at home, keep an eye on this and think about using the verb as the last word in the sentence. Another thing an exclamation sentence must have is, of course, an exclamation mark. This is the punctuation we use to end an exclamation sentence. Okay? And the final thing I want to draw your attention to is something we don't have to have in an exclamation sentence, but it's something we often do, and it's something that I think would be useful in your exclamation sentences, an adjective. Okay? So just to recap, an exclamation sentence starts with a what or a how. It ends with a verb often, but it must have a verb somewhere, and it always ends with an exclamation mark. And at some point, it could have an adjective in there as well. Let's create some examples. Okay. So, what a fantastic trip it was. I could have used a different adjective. What an amazing time. Now, if I just had what an amazing time, it wouldn't be an exclamation sentence because I haven't got the verb at the end. So I can change it from what an amazing time to, I know, what an amazing time I had. And the final thing is, I must remember the exclamation mark at the end. What an amazing time I had. Let's try another one. Let's try with how this time. How, let's think of the adjective. How interesting my trip was. Okay, and both of these sentences, you can see, let me get my highlighter pen. You can see we started with a what or a how. We finished using a verb. I finished here with a had verb. I finished down here with the was verb. And we punctuated using an exclamation mark. And on each one we use a different adjective just to explain a little bit more about our trip, just to emphasize that our trip was fantastic, just to emphasize that our trip was amazing, just to emphasize that the trip was interesting. So when you're creating exclamation sentences at home, keep these key learning points in mind. Okay? Next thing we're going to look at is the final sentences. Have you ever been on an interesting trip? Could you write a recount about your experience? What these sentences are designed to do is to communicate directly to the audience. That means basically speak to the audience. The most simple way that I think you can do this is to ask the audience some questions. Once they've read your recount, why not ask them some questions about a trip that they've been on or something they've done? So the questions I asked my audience were, have you ever been on a really interesting trip? Could you write a recount of your experiences? There's just a couple of key learning points to consider here. First of all is the word you start with. You have to start with a question word, a word which is going to help to ask a question. Have, or could, or what, or where, or when, or why. All those question words could be used as the very first word in the sentence. The final thing you need to remember is, of course, your punctuation. If you're asking a question, you need to finish your sentence with a question mark. Okay? So let's have a go at this myself. Let's just quickly get that down there. So I could be asking, so I could say, and I've already said, have you ever been on a really interesting trip? I could say, oh, I know, what about a where question? Where was the last place you went on holiday? Oh, I feel like I've forgotten something. Ah, of course, my question mark to end the sentence. Okay? So why not try this technique right at the end of your recount? Once you've given your audience a chance to read your entire recount, why not ask them a question about a trip that they've been on? And don't forget, let's keep those key learning points in mind. Let's start the sentence with a question word, and let's finish our sentence with a question mark. Okay? If you follow these rules, I don't see any reason why we can't add some fantastic exclamation sentences and sentences that communicate directly to the audience into our latest pieces of recount writing. Good luck, and don't forget, if you do create some fantastic pieces of writing, please send them in to me. I'm desperate to read some of your work. Okay, good luck, guys.